Sicario, Day of the Soldado is the sequel to the 2015 film starring Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro. They came back for this sequel. Unfortunately, we didn't get Emily Blunt to come back.
Oh.
But, Nate, this movie was a little confusing as far as why it was made in the first place, because it felt like Sicario, not only was it a well-made film, wasn't really a big box office success to where it's like, of course it was getting a sequel. And not to mention, I think the first one was wrapped up in a nice, tight little package, too. So
yeah,
we were both very baffled by the
Right.
fact that this movie got a sequel. But we got the sequel.
Sure.
It's here. And so let's just talk about, Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro. They led the first movie, and now they're back for the sequel. What'd you think about their performances?
Actually, the strongest point in this film for me is the acting, hands down, is awesome.
Yeah.
Especially seeing Josh Brolin in a role where he's Josh Brolin this summer, where he's not a superhero villain or anything like that. I love these actors. I think they're great, and I think they did just as good a job as they did in the first one. And I like that they gave Benicio del Toro a lot more to work with in this one. What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And you're right. It is good to see Brolin being just himself, in a role.
Yeah.
And yes, Benicio del Toro, once again, he was my favorite part of the first movie. He is easily my favorite part of this movie. I love his character, Alejandro, and I'm glad that there was more focus on him and that he was a bigger character in this movie. And that, although I will say, the second half of his arc in this movie is starting to feel kind of cliche. It's been a trope that's really been hit a lot on the head lately.
It was a surprise that this movie took that direction in general, where it was almost like an escort mission
Yeah.
out of nowhere. And it softened the character up a little bit when it comes to Benicio del Toro.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave him a little bit more room to breathe when it comes to his acting, because I don't really remember him being in a leading role in a long time.
Yeah.
You sort of see him pop up in movies here and there, but this one he got front and center. And yeah, I felt the same way. And that sort of comes with the switching of pacing in this is sort of one of my beefs with it a little bit, where it just sort of seems to slow down a little bit for me.
Oh, I think this movie almost slams on the brakes when we get to the third act. I found that the third act to be very slow and kind of drawn out. And it would have been, the third act's pacing would have been a payoff if it felt like, there was a nice conclusion to the end of this movie. But I'll say that's kind of one of my big gripes with it. It felt like there was no real conclusion. Like, there was kind of a conflict between Josh Brolin's character and Benicio del Toro's character.
Lightly.
And we never got to see that, come full circle.
Yeah.
And also, I felt like they had Alejandro's character trajected on this arc. In the end, he's just kind of back to where he was.
Yeah.
And I get that being part of the end of the first movie, with the
Yeah.
ending of the first movie, where it's just like the violence is still happening, despite everything that happened in this movie, like the drug war, the cartels,
It also
all that
happened.
is still going on. And so I can kind of see that in just like the first movie, where it's like all this happened, but not a whole lot's changed. It just felt a little different this time around.
It did feel a little different. This felt completely different than the first film in general to me. And I don't mean that in a
Yes.
totally bad way. It's its own film. But I think that there was a lot to say here. I agree kind of with the third act. I actually really liked the third act. I thought there were surprises there that I didn't see coming. And I was waiting for some surprises in this movie, and it delivered some on the third act. For me, it was the second the second act that sort of lulled. I was like, okay, let's pick it back up a little bit, because it does open up with a lot going on.
Yes.
And there's a lot of commentary, social commentary, political commentary that is very poignant for today when it comes to immigration, border crossing, things like that. So I thought that was pretty cool. Not that it really answers any questions, or that it's very heavy-handed, or that it's even leaning on one way or the other. It keeps it pretty even keel through the whole thing.
No, I think it's just it's more showcasing the effect of the whole situation, no matter which way you feel about it.
And you get a little bit of an insight of the process of actually people crossing the border and what it's like and the dangers that happen along with it. But for me, unfortunately, the first one had these white knuckle moments that were so tense. I was on the edge of my seat, and this one did not really have any of those scenes for me. Not like the crossing the border in the first one scene.
No. And I think that's probably my biggest gripe against this movie. Earlier this year, we reviewed Molly's Game, and that was written and directed by Aaron Sorkin, who wrote The Social Network. And I was like, in my opinion of Molly's Game was, this is what The Social Network could have been if it didn't have a talented filmmaker as David Fincher directing it. I feel like this movie is what the first Sicario could have been if you didn't have somebody as talented as Denis Villeneuve directing the first one.
Yeah.
So I just think that that's really what this boils down to. It's not a bad movie.
No.
And it's just a lesser version of the original.
Yeah.
And I think it starts right there at the director's chair that, Denis Villeneuve is one of the best talents working in film today. So outside of a handful of directors, it's an automatic step down. So I feel like this movie was just kind of set up for being a step down in the fact that I don't know if it really needed a sequel and that you got, just a lesser filmmaker to direct it.
Yeah, and I think there's audiences out there that might not think that because they're not paying so close attention, but I agree that there's not a thumbprint from a director on this.
No.
It never felt that unique in its style like it does with Denis Villeneuve, but it still is a well-made movie. I think that it's good, but it goes back to that, did we need this? I think that story-wise, it's very different from the original story. So that's good. I don't think they retread the same story over again, even though maybe it is familiar to other stories. But I like that they kept it a little bit more personal. I thought from the trailers this was going to be very, expansive of the cartel and the effects of the drug war and starting a war between. But instead it really sort of zones in on a very personal story.
Yeah. Yeah, it sets up for a big scale, but then it kind of shrinks down to a smaller story. So in that, it's just a little uneven for me, where we're kind of getting set up for something bigger, better in the sequel, and we just kind of shrink it back,
Yeah, I can see that. It's misleading.
Yes. Yeah.
Buffs.
Okay, Nate, so we had some complaints, but it didn't sound like we didn't enjoy our time in the theater. Go ahead and put your score on Sicario, too.
I enjoyed myself with this movie. If not, it was a little underwhelming, I guess. But I think there's going to be a lot of people out there that enjoy this genre of movie, and I could feel the enjoyment throughout the theater as well. But you said it earlier, this is just kind of a 7 kind of summer. And I'm going to give Sicario 2 a 7.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Sicario de Soldado. It also gets a 7 from me. And I feel that it's not a bad movie.
No.
On its own.
It's good.
But in comparison to the first one, it's just lesser.
Yeah.
So I can't help but compare it to the first one. But I think that people of the, crime thriller, spy movie genre will appreciate this one. Mm-hmm. There are some good scenes of action in there too, but it's just lacking the tension. It's lacking all the tightness that the first one had.
Just
so.
not quite there.
Yeah, so a pair of 7s.
Mm-hmm.
Buffs.
All right, so that's it for our review of Sicario de Soldado. What'd you guys think? Are we focusing too much on the original? Go ahead and leave a comment down below.
Next week we're going to be bringing you our review of Ant-Man and the Wasp. I'm really excited about this. I don't know you're not as pumped.
I'm not as pumped, but I'm optimistic. I'm hoping. Yeah. I'm just hoping that I get some little Infinity War tidbits where it's rewarding me for going to see that movie.
Yeah, at least just be fun. That's all I want out of it. So we'll bring you that review next week. But until then, wherever you are, whoever you're with,
watch more movies.